So my name is seowon back, or seowon, which is in Korean, and I am a sophomore geography major from Queens, New York. I would have to say very stressful and busy, and at times fun because I like the people around me, but there was a lot that I had to deal with at the time. I have to deal with a lot right now too, but I think for a little, I don't know, youngling at that time, it was a lot harder to deal with. So, my favorite subjects were history, art, and gym. I didn't really enjoy the other subjects as much, but the reason why I was so drawn to history is because I loved listening to stories and learning about systems and how my present is connected to the past, and then how I can reimagine a future just by understanding how systems work. And I was also really drawn to art because I love being able to put whatever I was thinking in my head onto a piece of paper, and I was actually pretty good at it. And I think the fact that I was good at art, and that was one of the few subjects that I thought I excelled at than other students in my school, was the reason why I thought it was my favorite subject. And I'm saying it in this way because my schools are very competitive, so I was always being compared to other students, and then I kind of did that myself, just following the lead. And my favorite subject was also gym because I was a very active kid, and I loved running. Vassar, when I first came to Vassar in my first year, I thought it felt very much like a retirement home compared to back at home, where I felt like people were constantly doing something, and they wanted to be the best at what they were doing. But then here, it seemed like nobody cared about being the best. So I had so much anxiety about that in the beginning. I've gotten used to it, and I've started to focus more on my mental health than trying to produce something that was amazing. And also just being better at making connections with people, because back in school I didn't really care too much about that. My school was mostly made up of either first gen or second gen immigrants, and I'm a first gen immigrant. I came to the US when I was 3 years old, so it was nice to have that in common with other students, trying to grapple two cultures, and feeling the pressure from your parents, and understanding how that's because I think it's a very different culture from American culture, just how parents see their children. My high school teachers were mostly white, and I went to an American Studies high school, so we were very focused on learning about American history. So the teachers being white and then most of us being immigrants, I think there was definitely a gap of understanding between both groups. So just having a student body that understood how you were feeling, from just how the teachers were treating you, was really helpful for me. Yeah, so most of my peers were similar to me, but I honestly didn't really talk to a lot of the students that much, especially I didn't have super close friends in high school, and so I mostly just understood the environment generally. I didn't have a deep understanding of a lot of the students. In elementary and middle school, I would say that I was closer to the students then. In my elementary school, we were put in the same class every year, and I was the only other East Asian person, so it was mostly South Asian. But I think I think through like my elementary and middle school experiences, I got to understand what it meant, like the different definitions for being like Asian American. Also, just how like Asian Americans are one group of people because we have like similar experiences. So I think I connected better to my peers in elementary and middle school more. Not because like they were Asian American, but because I was with them for a longer time. A lot of the students in my middle school I've been with since like elementary school, and we were all like going through a really hard time because the teachers are all super strict. So we bonded over that, and I think just bonding over something like really traumatic like that brought us together. But then in high school, it was a lot more lenient, so there wasn't really a reason for us to like understand each other more deeply. Definitely, my elementary and middle school were segregated, and I feel like it was done purposefully because you had to take a test to get into the specific program that I was in for elementary and middle school, and there's a privilege with like even knowing about the test and getting a good score on it. Like if your parents were educated or they knew that they had to have their children in that kind of environment, then it was more likely that you would be taking the test and doing well on it. I think it was segregated in that way. And over the summer, I listened to this podcast called, oh wait, I forgot the name of the podcast. It was Nice White People, and it talks about like the New York City school system, and how like it segregates its students through like tests like the specialized high school exam and the gifted and talented exam, and just having like special programs in general. So I think like what I got out of the podcast was how purposeful it like the process could be, but we tend to forget what happened to like make these tests possible. So then when we try to fight against it, it's easy to just like generalize the issues that came before because we don't really know the specific reasons why we needed these tests in the first place. Like from like parents, for example, and I think a lot of other Asian parents, they think that like these programs are needed so students can grow up in an environment that's right for them and feel challenged. That's like, I guess that's like the general reason why, but then it's harder to understand why these tests are not needed. The segregation wasn't a positive for a lot of my peers. When they left the elementary and middle school environment and then they went to other high schools, it was extremely challenging for us to like adjust to that new environment where we weren't treated as like special people. And I know like a lot of my peers like were depressed, and a lot of them got into drugs. I wouldn't say that it was only because of like the segregation, but I think the segregation and not having a more normal environment can contribute to like these feelings of not fitting in. I remember when I went to my new high school, which was more diverse, not just like in terms of like race and class, but also in terms of like what people were good at. Like in my elementary, middle school, people were good at like academics, but then here, everyone had like different strengths. Like for me, what I thought in the past, what I thought was like the best thing was to be the smartest person in the room, just because I like grew up in that culture. So it was hard for me to like feel like I could belong to another community. When I think of diversity and inclusion, it's like it's being able to represent different people of all like races, classes, gender, and like different ways that you identify people in a way that the people themselves like feel like they're represented properly. So this means not just like generalizing their stories and their experiences, but also giving an audience the opportunity to think about them more deeply and contextualize the experiences in like a broader system. I think like we do tend to like use the words diversity and inclusion a lot because they're pretty hot words like nowadays. In elementary, middle school, and high school, I did not understand what these words meant because it wasn't needed for me to know. I guess like a lot of the students that I grew up with in elementary and middle school, what they cared about was about like being a doctor and like being an engineer and like lawyer and like all the occupations that could bring a lot of money to like your family, because I also like grew up in a pretty low income environment. Like I wasn't low income, but like a lot of my peers were, so we didn't talk because it was like a privilege to know what diversity and inclusion was, so we didn't talk about it. And you didn't have to like, it was like you didn't have to care about it if you were able to like succeed meaning like you had a well-paid job. Like you didn't have to care about social issues because you like made enough money to care for yourself. So that was like, so I didn't know anything about diversity and inclusion. But then in high school, this was like during COVID, so we were all like quarantined indoors, and one alum from my high school created this account called like my school, like in blank, like my school takes a stand. And it was a platform where students could talk about their experiences around racism and sexism within my school. And I think they were mostly towards my gym teachers and my principal and like some of the history teachers, because I've like heard a lot about this like from other students. I didn't experience it myself, but like one of them would talk about how we needed like a wall between Mexico and the United States as like part of the lesson. And our dean, one of the students talked to our dean about like being sexually assaulted by another student, and like she didn't like do anything about it, and she told her that it's like your fault for like dressing a certain way. So like there were like similar issues to that, like a gym teacher looking at a student like in a perverted way, or like our principal touching a student's arm like in a very like, I don't know, like just not in a appropriate way. And that's when I started to like see that these were patterns. I tried to like, in my head I tried to deny like that these were serious issues because it like stressed me out so much. It was more so like the students that like taught me about diversity and inclusion than like any of my teachers. I live in a very nice neighborhood. Well, I've lived in the same neighborhood for like the past 14, 15 years. And it's mostly made up like first-gen immigrants. There's a lot of schools nearby, and a library very close to my house, so it's very safe. And I've always felt like comfortable walking around because I was like always around like immigrants, and there weren't like any tourists too. So it was just a lot of young parents and children. I lived in Woodside, like 54th Street, so it's like closer to Sunnyside than Elmhurst. The food there is really good too. Also because it's not like catered to tourists, it's like for the people that live in the neighborhood. Yeah, it's like a perfect neighborhood to like grow up in. There's like a park very close by too, but I didn't really know anybody in my neighborhood because I didn't go to like church, or like my family and I didn't go to like any community events. So I saw the same people, but I've never really talked to them. But I went to elementary and elementary school in Sunnyside, and middle school in Astoria, like PS 122, because like this same program that I was in elementary school continued in that middle school, not in like my other school. So I had to like commute there. Like it took like 40 minutes by train. High school, I went to school in Long Island City. I got to choose what high school I could go to. Like we had to rank the high schools, and then depending on like our scores in middle school and our like test scores, our state test scores, we would get into one of them on the list. And so I went to the Academy of American Studies, and it was like third on my list, I think. Yeah, I remember like being really upset about having to go to that school because no one in my middle school ever really went there, and everyone else was like going to like the top specialized high schools, and then I was like the only one going, like one of the few people going to like a regular high school. And I don't, just like hearing myself say that was like how I thought in middle school, but like we were always comparing each other like that. I have never been a good test taker growing up because I had a lot of anxiety around tests, and just doing anything in like a specific amount of time. I haven't really cared for tests growing up, and I didn't really care if I did good or bad on them because I knew that like even though I did bad on an exam, like it didn't mean that my future was gonna be over or anything. Because I think I've done pretty good so far, and I haven't ever done like super well on an exam in my life. So unless it was like history and like a history exam, I was pretty good at it. But other than that, like I hated every other exam. I didn't really understand why we had to like take tests all the time, because most of us were just like studying for it last minute and just like reading like through our notes in the bus or like in the train, and then kind of just like regurgitating all the information on paper. So I didn't understand how that was supposed to like teach us anything. I felt like a better way to like measure how we knew the material was through like something more creative, where we would have to apply these ideas into like our own lives and like our own projects. So I always worked really hard on my projects, just because I knew that I loved to do it. Like it was more fun than having to study for a test. My high school was not adequately funded, just like a lot of other public high schools in New York City. I think part of the reason was because we didn't hit like a certain benchmark to be like a really good high school, nor did we have like low enough test grades to receive more funding. So we were like in the middle, and it's not sometimes I feel like in the New York City public school system, it's not great to be in the middle, like because then you're just like every other high school, and every other high school does not get enough funding. But also I think part of the reason was because my principal didn't handle the funds correctly. Like, he didn't really know how to. So I like a lot of the money was spent on just classes and materials that students didn't really need. Like, we had the opportunity to go to like see an opera, maybe like every month, but no one in my school was like interested in opera. It was like the principal that wanted to see them. So and I remember, like, because our school didn't have enough funding, the students were made to like fund for the school. I was a part of my school student government, and I remember going around the cafeteria every day and selling candy in these like blue plastic bags that said like Academy of American Studies on it. And it was so tiring, like constantly making students like buy candy from us. Like, it was like we were contributing to their like future diabetes or something. and and we would get in trouble for like selling them in class, because we weren't allowed to. And then if we didn't sell the candies in time, we would also get in trouble. So and then like all the money that we raised was for dances and fun activities that students could just like release their stress in. And so we had like, so that was like a branch of the school that was like really needed because the administration couldn't provide these opportunities for fun. So like the fact that our school wasn't well funded, we had to find like alternatives to like to get bigger opportunities. Yeah, we didn't have enough guidance counselors either, and they were like constantly busy doing like organizing the school, like organizing what classes we would get into, and having to like talk to students about like any issues they had, and just all the like administrative stuff that the principal needed as well. So there was no like college guidance counselor until they made our English professor the college counselor. And he didn't know anything about the process too. So I didn't ever like go to him for help on the college application process. I kind of just like learned from my peers and like did research on my own. So yeah, like my parents didn't know about it either because they never went through like the US schooling system. Yeah, there was just a lack of resources like everywhere. And I was a part of the like Borough Student Advisory Council for like the North Queens area. So I learned that this was like an issue within a lot of New York City public high schools, the lack of college counseling and resources and funding. And we would like work with the DOE to improve it, but like it wasn't like they could just like give us money. It was mostly just a space where we would talk about our issues and try to find solutions together. And I like having those spaces. I'm taking Asian American Studies right now, and we've talked about this question in like the first few classes. What I generally got from that conversation was it's like a transnational identity, like intersecting the boundaries of like your like Asian identity and like your American identity, but it's like one. They're not too separate. They're not separate. Being Asian American to me means that I have to deal with life differently from someone that does not have like two identities. This could mean like growing up, like learning English, but then like forgetting your like native home language later on and kind of regretting that, like not ever learning it because you were so focused on like trying to be American. So I think that is one like a special Asian American experience. And then also having to be like act a different way in two separate spaces, in home and in school, where at home I felt like I could be more freely Asian American, meaning I could like talk in Korean sometimes, but then like English and like just like combining these languages together, and that was like the most comfortable for me. And then also like acting more Korean, I guess, meaning it's okay for me to like be quiet or like act submissively. Not like, okay, not, I don't like to say submissive because I feel like that has like such a weird connotation because like that's something that we're trying to like subvert. Like, yeah, like being able to be more insular and like keeping my thoughts to myself like when I wanted to, but then at school having like being around still like an American culture, even though all of us were like mostly Asian American, but like being questioned to why I was like being quiet when people needed a response from me, like having to speak like English well, and constantly having to talk about myself when I like didn't feel like sharing like my half thought out responses to people, like so like having to grapple these two worlds, but then learning from both of them, I think, is uniquely Asian American. I also like still don't really understand what it like how to say it in a proper, like in an understandable way. Like my professor has told me that like you know a lot about what Asian American studies means, or like what critical ethnic studies means just from your previous experiences, and you should be able to like connect that to the work that you're doing. But I'm still like working on it because I've never really, because a lot of my experiences were not like super positive, I don't really like to think about them a lot, and it's hard for me to like contextualize it in a way that like other people can see and understand it as well, because I'm still trying to understand my experiences. So just like I think having that challenge in and of itself, and not having enough awareness about other Asian American experiences like through the media and like reading books from Asian American authors, I think is another way that I would describe what it means to be Asian American. But I'm like trying to learn, and even like talking about it with my parents, I think would be nice. Like actually all of us read Pachinko, like everyone in my family read Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, but they read it in Korean and like I read it in English, and we're gonna talk about it soon because it talks about being like Korean Japanese, so like having a diasporic experience, I guess similar to being Korean American. And I think like being able to talk about someone else's stories and relate it to your own, it's a lot easier than just trying to like have words to describe your own experiences when to you they still seem so abstract and not super real. So the model minority myth, it's, I would say that the term itself, it like seems like the model minority myth is a myth because the myth is in it. It's not, because it's like something that Asian Americans have to deal with sometimes on a daily basis, like being perceived as a model minority. And model minority meaning like you're representing what could be possible of people that are marginalized because we're apparently super successful and like we make enough money for our families and we all have lives that we feel like happy and comfortable in, when it's not true. And I guess like model minority myth kind of insinuates that with like the term myth, but also like I think it also shows that like it's like something that we could change in meaning, but I feel like it's not something that could be changed, but it's more so like an identity that like evolves. I remember like the only like the way that my elementary and middle school teachers would describe me to my parents was that I was very hardworking. I hated like how they would define me in that way, because it to them it meant that like all my other good traits were kind of just inevitable based on my Asian American identity. But like the fact that I was hardworking like stood out to them, and to me hardworking meant like being industrious and kind of just following what everyone else tells you to do, and like not having like your own thoughts or feelings. And I think like the fact that I was like quiet too, like it kind of like I kind of allowed it to happen, but also I didn't really care about like trying to change how my teachers thought about me. I think in that way like I did have to deal with like the model minority myth. Like I said before, like everyone in my elementary and middle school was also like Asian, so we all had to deal with the model minority myth, but it just became like one group being the model minority myth, not like individual people. So like because all of us were great students, there wasn't much that the teachers could do to make us even better except like push us to work harder. I didn't ever learn about Asian history. And like in high school, like we did learn about World War II and like the Hiroshima bombing. There was like a section on immigrant experiences that we could like skip if we wanted to, which I like obviously did because I didn't really like have the time to learn more than I needed to in class. And like whenever we learned about Asian history, it was just like, oh, Japan did this, and then like not about the people. Yeah, but that was also just like history in general in classes. Like you don't really learn about people's individual experiences unless they were like presidents or other important people. One thing that helped me a lot is actually like having deeper connections to other Asian American students on campus, being okay with like certain parts of my identity that I didn't like in the past, like being super hardworking, not having a perfect English, which I think like other Asian American students and also like international students have like a similar identity to. So that was helpful, like because I liked people that were like me. And then also I've been trying to like undo and like learn through my participation in the Ambassador Asian American Studies Working Group, where we advocate for more Asian American Studies courses and critical ethnic studies courses at Vassar, and that has helped me a lot with like grappling with what like all the traumatic experiences I had in high school, and not just like allowing it to be a part of my identity, but like something that could that I can actually have control over.